In the quiet West German village of Aumühle, former Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz sits in his study and opens a newly published British book titled The Ultra Secret. For nearly 30 years, the architect of the devastating U-boat fleet believed his Naval Enigma codes were mathematically impenetrable. He had attributed the total destruction of his wolfpacks entirely to superior Allied radar, long-range aircraft, and overwhelming industrial production. But as he turns the pages, the 83-year-old commander is confronted with a staggering revelation. For much of the Second World War, British intelligence had been secretly reading his most heavily guarded encrypted communications. This discovery did not merely shock an aging admiral, it completely shattered the established post-war narrative of the Battle of the Atlantic, forcing a fundamental re-evaluation of how the German submarine fleet was actually defeated. To uncover the truth, we have to investigate the true operational scale of the Bletchley Park decryptions. It was never a seamless triumph of cryptography. We must examine the agonizing stretches of the war when the Allies went completely blind and dissect the raw industrial and technological realities that were required to finally break the U-boat threat. There is a profound tension at the heart of this campaign, a commander's unshakable faith in German engineering pitted against the hidden reality of Allied codebreaking and the persistent historical myth that intelligence alone won the ocean war. To understand exactly why this late revelation was so deeply traumatic for Karl Dönitz, we have to step back into the darkest months of the early 1940s. We must return to a moment when the entire survival of Great Britain hung by a rapidly fraying thread in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. By the summer of 1940, the geopolitical map of Europe had been violently redrawn, leaving Great Britain entirely isolated. The fall of France did not just mean the loss of a major ally, it fundamentally shifted the strategic geometry of the naval war. The German Kriegsmarine swiftly took control of the French Atlantic ports, establishing massive, reinforced concrete submarine pens in coastal cities like Lorient, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire. This drastically cut the transit time for German U-boats, allowing them to project power much deeper into the ocean. Britain was now an island fortress under total siege, and its survival dictated a brutal mathematical reality. To keep its factories producing aircraft, its tanks rolling, and its civilian population from starving, the nation required millions of tons of imported raw materials, food, and fuel every single month. This indispensable logistical artery stretched across the treacherous expanse of the North Atlantic, carried on the backs of slow, rust-streaked merchant ships organized into massive convoys. These civilian vessels, heavily laden and plodding along at barely 10 knots, were the only thing standing between the British Empire and total economic collapse. Defending this sprawling maritime supply chain was a desperate, largely blind endeavor. The Royal Navy was stretched to its absolute breaking point, suffering from a severe shortage of modern escort vessels and forced to rely on obsolete, hastily converted civilian craft to guard the flanks of the convoys. Even worse, there was a massive stretch of the ocean, a desolate area spanning hundreds of miles south of Greenland and Iceland, known ominously to sailors as the Black Pit. This was the Mid-Atlantic Air Gap. Allied long-range patrol aircraft simply lacked the fuel capacity to reach this sector and return. When merchant convoys sailed into the Black Pit, they left the protective umbrella of coastal air support far behind. They were sailing entirely blind, unable to predict where or when the enemy would strike. In this unpatrolled void, the ocean swallowed millions of tons of indispensable shipping, bleeding the British merchant fleet white. The mastermind orchestrating this strategic slaughter was not operating from the freezing, violently pitching deck of a warship, but from a comfortable, heavily guarded command post in Paris. From his headquarters at the Château de la Muette, Vice Admiral Karl Dönitz was executing a radically new form of naval warfare. He understood that individual submarines, operating blindly and autonomously on their own, were highly inefficient in the vastness of the ocean. Instead, Dönitz implemented the Rudeltaktik, the wolfpack strategy. He envisioned a dynamic, synchronized orchestra of destruction controlled entirely from a central plotting table. U-boats would form long patrol lines across the suspected convoy routes. The moment a single submarine spotted a convoy, It was strictly forbidden from attacking immediately. Instead, the commander was ordered to shadow the ships from just over the horizon, acting as an invisible spotter, and immediately broadcast the convoy's heading, speed, and composition back to the Situation Room in Paris. From that map room, Dönitz would then micromanage the battle. He would vector every available U-boat in the surrounding sector toward the target, organizing them to launch a coordinated, overwhelming nighttime surface attack that would completely saturate the few escorting destroyers. But this highly centralized command system possessed an inherent, glaring vulnerability. It required a massive, constant stream of two-way radio communication. U-boats had to transmit daily weather reports, fuel states, and precise sighting data. Dönitz had to transmit specific navigational vectors and shifting attack orders. In any standard military doctrine, flooding the airwaves with constant radio chatter was viewed as suicidal, as it allowed the enemy to easily intercept the transmissions and pinpoint the locations of the submarines using radio direction finding. Yet, Dönitz accepted this staggering volume of radio traffic with absolute confidence. He was completely convinced that British listening stations could intercept all the static they wanted, because the content of those messages was locked inside a mathematically impregnable vault. Every single operational order and sighting report was encrypted using the complex Naval Enigma machine. Unlike standard military ciphers, the specially modified Kriegsmarine Enigma utilized a sophisticated system of interchangeable rotors, specific reflector wiring, and a plug board that scrambled letters into tens of millions of billions of potential combinations. The encryption settings were changed constantly, often daily, creating a cryptographic labyrinth that German engineers calculated would take thousands of years to crack. Relying on this perceived technological invincibility, Dönitz directed his lethal wolfpacks with impunity. He operated under the absolute certainty that his centralized command system was utterly flawless, safe behind an unbreakable cipher. But in May of 1941, a single, desperate naval action in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic would fracture that illusion forever. On May 9, 1941, south of Iceland, the Royal Navy escort group guarding convoy OB-318 achieves a devastating ASDIC contact. The destroyer HMS Bulldog relentlessly hammers the target with depth charges, violently shaking the steel hull of U-110. Its commander, Kapitänleutnant Fritz Julius Lemp, the man who hours earlier believed he was closing in for a kills, is forced to make a catastrophic decision. With batteries failing and chlorine gas filling the boat, Lemp blows ballast and surfaces, ordering his crew to abandon ship. In the chaos of the emergency ascent, Lemp believes U-110 is sinking and ordered the scuttling charges set. But amidst British gunfire and the scramble for the icy water, the critical orders to destroy secret materials are never executed. Lemp himself is presumed drowned in the freezing sea. Recognizing the submarine is not sinking, Bulldog's commander immediately sends a boarding party in a small whaler, led by Sub-Lieutenant David Balm. Under extreme pressure, unsure if the boat is booby-trapped or about to go down, Balm scrambles on to the abandoned U-110. Venturing into the eerie silence of the lower decks, he discovers the radio room, untouched. In a physical intelligence haul of unprecedented importance, Balm's team retrieves a current, fully intact Naval Enigma machine, the vital M3 variant, along with the current rotor settings and, most crucially, the top-secret codebooks and specific grids for Dolphin, the home waters naval cipher. This material is immediately rushed under ultimate secrecy to Bletchley Park. For months, Alan Turing and his specialized team in Hut 8 had been blind, unable to crack the complexity of the Kriegsmarine modifications. Now, with the U-110 materials, the mathematical vault is stripped bare. Within weeks, the Operational Intelligence Center in London is reading Dönitz's operational traffic within hours of its transmission. This sudden, secret window changes everything. It becomes a high-stakes game of invisible chess. The Admiralty can see the precise coordinates of the wolfpack patrol lines, allowing them to reroute entire convoys around the waiting submarines. But they must use this lifeline with agonizing caution. Any too perfect dodging will alert Dönitz that his cipher is broken. While British convoys miraculously begin vanishing from expected kill zones, Dönitz, in his Paris headquarters, is confronted by charts that are disturbingly, suspiciously empty. Suspicion begins to infiltrate German Naval High Command, triggering the first internal security crisis of the Atlantic campaign. Throughout the autumn and winter of 1941, an unsettling pattern begins to emerge in the heavily guarded war room at the Château de la Muette. Vice Admiral Karl Dönitz, meticulously tracking his U-boat deployments on massive wall charts, realizes that his submarines are repeatedly converging on open, entirely empty ocean. According to all standard maritime logic, the heavily trafficked North Atlantic shipping lanes should be teeming with Allied merchant vessels. Instead, his wolfpack commanders are radioing back reports of unbroken horizons and phantom contacts. More disturbingly, whenever a U-boat does manage to catch a fleeting glimpse of a convoy, the British merchant ships are executing sudden, inexplicable course corrections. They are sharply veering away from the established German patrol lines long before visual contact or standard intelligence could have warned them. For a commander who operates entirely on statistical probabilities and rigid centralized control, these empty oceans are a mathematical impossibility. The British are navigating as if they possess an invisible, real-time map of the U-boat dispositions. Suspicion quickly takes root in Paris. In late 1941, Dönitz officially orders his staff to investigate the unthinkable, the potential compromise of the Enigma cipher network. The high-stakes inquiry falls to the German Naval Intelligence Agency, the B-Dienst, and the cryptographic experts of the Naval High Command. They conduct a rigorous internal security audit. They meticulously review the mathematical architecture of the Enigma machine, recalculate the astronomical permutations of the plug board and the three rotors, and examine the strict physical security protocols for distributing the codebooks to the fleet. Their conclusion is unanimous, highly confident, and officially documented. They declare the Enigma system to be fundamentally unbreakable. The machine is mathematically sound. Therefore, the intelligence leak must be human or operational. The analysts of the B-Dienst construct a series of alternative theories to explain the British evasions. They attribute the missing convoys to widespread treason within the German or Italian naval staff. They hypothesize that the British have captured physical grid charts from sunken vessels, allowing them to decipher the basic grid reference system used by the U-boats. They suspect that an extensive, highly organized network of Allied spies in the occupied French ports is observing the U-boat departures and calculating their intercept vectors. Finally, they point to the growing effectiveness of British shipborne radar, believing the escorts are simply detecting the submarines at much longer ranges. Reassured by the absolute institutional confidence of his intelligence apparatus, Dönitz dismisses the notion of a cryptographic breach. He remains trapped in a psychological loop of false security, trusting German engineering over the contradictory, alarming evidence accumulating on his own battle maps. However, Dönitz is not a commander who leaves his strategic communications to chance. Even though he fundamentally believes the three-rotor Enigma is secure, he recognizes the operational need to upgrade his communication network for the rapidly expanding Atlantic campaign. On February 1st, 1942, the German Kriegsmarine executes a devastating technological shift. Dönitz officially introduces the M4, a newly engineered four-rotor Enigma machine, and implements a completely new segregated cipher network designated specifically for his Atlantic U-boats. The Germans call this new network Triton. The codebreakers in England call it Shark. This is not merely an incremental technological upgrade. The addition of a fourth, specially wired rotor into the Enigma sequence exponentially multiplies the mathematical complexity of the encryption. For the codebreakers at Bletchley Park, who have spent months painstakingly calibrating their massive electromechanical bombs to decipher the three-rotor Dolphin traffic, the activation of Triton is a catastrophic event. Overnight, the crucial intelligence lifeline is violently severed. The intercepts coming into Hut 8 instantly transform from readable operational orders into impenetrable, chaotic noise. Alan Turing and his team of analysts are abruptly plunged into total, paralyzing blindness. For 10 agonizing months, the Operational Intelligence Center in London loses its most critical strategic weapon. They can no longer plot the exact coordinates of the German patrol lines. They can no longer reroute the slow-moving merchant convoys around the lurking danger. The invisible chess match is definitively over. The British Admiralty is suddenly forced to route their vital supply ships across the Atlantic entirely blind, relying on outdated estimations, generic weather data, and sheer, desperate luck. The psychological toll on the intelligence officers sitting safely in London is immense, but the physical cost paid out on the freezing ocean is absolutely catastrophic. The activation of the Triton cipher perfectly coincides with one of the most aggressive and lethal phases of the German naval war. Without ultra-intelligence to guide the convoys to safety, the merchant fleets sailed directly into the teeth of the U-boat offensive. Dönitz seizes this specific window of Allied blindness to launch Operation Paukenschlag, or drumbeat. He dispatches his Type 9 long-range submarines across the Atlantic, targeting the completely undefended and highly illuminated eastern seaboard of the United States. The result is not a battle. It is a systematic, uncontested maritime slaughter. Throughout the first half of 1942, the U-boats operate with near total impunity. American and British tankers, freighters, and cargo vessels are torpedoed within sight of civilian beaches, their burning hulls lighting up the night sky from Florida to New York. Because Bletchley Park cannot intercept Dönitz's deployment orders, the Allied navies cannot anticipate where the next strike will occur. They are constantly reacting, arriving on the scene only in time to pull oil-soaked survivors from the freezing, flaming water. As the year progresses, Dönitz shifts his focus back to the deep, contested waters of the North Atlantic. He establishes massive, sprawling patrol lines, sometimes utilizing 20 or 30 submarines in a single, highly coordinated wolfpack. Without the cryptographic warning system, British and American convoys blunder directly into these ambushes. The tonnage losses skyrocket to apocalyptic levels. In a single month, hundreds of thousands of tons of irreplaceable shipping, carrying fuel, steel, and food, are sent to the bottom of the ocean. This dark period of the war provides a grim, definitive proof of concept for the German strategy. It proves beyond any doubt that when the Enigma codes were genuinely secure, the U-boats were unequivocally winning the tonnage war. The strategy of centralized command, coordinated through massive volumes of radio traffic, is highly effective provided the enemy cannot read those communications. For Karl Dönitz, 1942 is a year of unparalleled triumph, validating his tactical doctrine and solidifying his absolute faith in German naval engineering. But the tragedy for the Allies in 1942 is not merely that they have lost their ability to read German codes, it is that the intelligence dynamic in the Atlantic has completely inverted. While Bletchley Park sits in the dark, desperately trying to mathematically dismantle the four-rotor M4 machine, the German B-Dienst is operating at the absolute peak of its efficiency. Under the direction of brilliant cryptographic analysts like Wilhelm Tranow, the German Naval Intelligence Service achieves a stunning, highly classified counterintelligence victory. They successfully decrypt the Allied naval cipher number 3, the primary, heavily used code system utilized by the British and American navies to coordinate the routing of their massive merchant convoys. The operational consequences of this cryptographic breach are devastating. While the British Admiralty is blindly guessing where the U-boats might be positioned, Karl Dönitz is sitting at his desk in Paris, reading the exact daily positions, the intended operational routes, and the critical cargo manifests of the Allied convoys. He knows precisely where the merchant ships are instructed to sail by their own high command, and he knows exactly what time they are scheduled to arrive at specific geographic coordinates. Armed with this perfectly accurate intelligence, Dönitz does not have to rely on his U-boats randomly searching the vast, empty ocean. He vectors his wolfpacks with lethal, surgical precision. He places his submarines directly in the path of the incoming convoys, ordering his commanders to submerge, shut down their engines, and wait. The British and American ships, entirely unaware that their highly classified routing instructions have been intercepted and read in Paris, sail straight into the crosshairs of the waiting torpedo tubes. It is a brutal, shifting intellectual duel where the losing side pays the immediate price in massive casualties. The German command is operating with a level of situational awareness that borders on clairvoyance, while the Allies are bleeding out in the dark, entirely unaware that their own codes are actively weaponizing the enemy against them. Thousands of sailors drown in the freezing Atlantic precisely because of this invisible, devastating intelligence inversion. As 1942 draws to a close, the strategic situation for Great Britain is rapidly approaching the point of total structural collapse. The island nation is hemorrhaging merchant vessels far faster than American and British shipyards can physically replace them. The vital fuel reserves are dwindling to critical levels. The civilian food rations are shrinking. If the Triton cipher is not broken, the U-boat fleet will succeed in starving the British Empire, making any future Allied invasion of occupied Europe physically and logistically impossible. Inside Bletchley Park, the atmosphere is one of frantic, exhausted desperation. Alan Turing and the brilliant cryptanalysts in Hut 8 know that pure mathematical deduction is no longer enough to overcome the four-rotor machine in a time frame that can save the convoys. The mathematics are simply too vast. They need a physical shortcut. They desperately need another pinch, a targeted, violent capture of highly classified German cryptographic materials at sea to pry open the M4 architecture. The crucial breakthrough does not come from a quiet laboratory in Buckinghamshire, but from the violent, terrified chaos of a sinking submarine in the eastern Mediterranean. On October 30th, 1942, the British destroyer HMS Petard forces the German U-boat U-559 to the surface after a relentless, punishing depth charge attack. The battered German crew immediately abandons the rapidly sinking vessel. Recognizing a fleeting, desperate opportunity, 3 British sailors jump into the freezing water and board the foundering submarine. They smash their way into the dark, flooding radio room. 2 of the men, Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier, frantically pass highly classified documents up the conning tower hatch as the freezing water rapidly rises around their waists. They manage to salvage the current edition of the German weather cipher and the critical short signal code books. Tragically, the submarine violently sinks before Fasson and Grazier can escape the lower decks, taking both men to the bottom of the sea. But the documents they sacrificed their lives to retrieve are immediately rushed back to London under the highest level of security. These captured weather code books provide the essential cryptographic key that Turing's team so desperately needs. Because the German weather reports are transmitted using a slightly different, more predictable formatting procedure, the Bletchley analysts can use the captured materials to identify the starting positions of the Enigma rotors. They feed this vital, blood-stained data into their newly upgraded high-speed electromechanical bombs. Finally, on December 13, 1942, the silence breaks. After 10 agonizing months of devastating blindness, Hut 8 successfully cracks the Triton cipher. The intercepts begin flowing again. The Operational Intelligence Center in London can once again see the shifting, lethal lines of the German wolfpacks on their plotting tables. The intelligence lifeline is miraculously, painstakingly restored. By early 1943, Bletchley Park is routinely reading Karl Dönitz's most secret operational orders, often within hours of their transmission. The Allies have regained their critical view of the chessboard. The dark, bloody period of 1942 is over, and the capability to reroute massive convoys away from immediate danger is re-established. But as the Battle of the Atlantic enters its most violent and decisive phase, the Allied command quickly learns a harsh, unforgiving lesson. In the brutal reality of a mechanized industrial war, intelligence is only half of the equation. Knowing exactly where a German submarine is hunting on a map does not mean you possess the physical power to stop it. The restoration of the Ultra Lifeline in early 1943 did not immediately translate into safety on the freezing ocean. In fact, the post-war legend that Bletchley Park single-handedly won the Battle of the Atlantic masks a much harsher, more brutal reality. Even with the Triton cipher cracked, Allied convoy losses suddenly skyrocketed again. Knowing the precise grid coordinates of a German submarine from an intercepted radio message meant nothing if the Allied navies lacked the physical weapons to destroy a steel hull in a gale-force Atlantic storm. Intelligence alone was completely useless without the tactical capacity to execute it. The true turning point of the naval war required a massive, unprecedented technological and industrial convergence that arrived just in time to prevent total systemic collapse. First was the deployment of airborne centimetric radar. By operating on a microscopic 10-centimeter wavelength, this new British detection system completely bypassed the German METOX radar detectors, allowing Allied aircraft to swoop out of low clouds and drop depth charges onto surfaced U-boats without triggering any warning bells. Second was the physical closure of the Black Pit. By stripping down the heavy airframes and installing massive auxiliary fuel tanks, the Allies finally unleashed the very long-range B-24 Liberators. These specialized bombers stretched their operational reach right into the center of the ocean, permanently eliminating the mid-Atlantic air gap where the wolfpacks had hunted with impunity. Finally, American and British shipyards began delivering mass-produced escort carriers and specialized, highly mobile support groups. These small converted warships carried their own integrated squadrons of anti-submarine aircraft, ensuring that convoys brought their own air cover directly into the deepest contested waters. This synchronized integration of code-breaking, stealth radar, and overwhelming air power set the stage for the most violent and decisive month in naval history. In May of 1943, a period that would become forever known to the Kriegsmarine as Black May, the full weight of this synchronized Allied war machine slammed into the German submarine fleet. Armed with daily ultra-decryptions from Bletchley Park, Allied escort groups no longer simply evaded the German wolfpacks, they aggressively hunted them down. When Dönitz arranged his submarines into massive, coordinated patrol lines, he was inadvertently constructing a lethal trap for his own men. Ultra-intelligence provided the precise geographic coordinates of these formations to the Admiralty. Specialized hunter-killer naval groups, operating independently of the slow merchant convoys, were vectored directly into the heart of the German lines. As U-boat commanders surfaced under the cover of darkness to recharge their electric batteries and transmit their mandatory operational reports to Paris, Allied destroyers utilized shipborne high-frequency direction finding, known as HFDUF, to instantly triangulate the exact origin of their radio signals. The subsequent execution was swift and merciless. Before the German watch officers could spot a silhouette on the horizon, very long-range Liberators and carrier-based strike aircraft would plunge out of the low Atlantic cloud cover, guided flawlessly by the new centimetric radar, which the German warning sensors were completely blind to. The planes dropped devastating, highly accurate patterns of aerial depth charges. The apex predators of the ocean had abruptly become the prey. German submarines were being blown apart and sent to the bottom before their crews even realized they had been detected. Inside the Grand Operations Room at the Château de la Muette in Paris, the atmosphere rapidly degenerated from supreme confidence into absolute command paralysis. Dönitz and his staff stood over their sprawling plotting tables, waiting for the routine daily radio checks from the Atlantic. Instead, they were met with a terrifying, expanding silence. Day after day, submarine after submarine simply failed to answer. The scale of the slaughter was unprecedented and mathematically unsustainable. In a single month, the Kriegsmarine lost a staggering 43 U-boats. Dönitz was facing a total operational collapse against an enemy that seemingly possessed the terrifying ability to see through thick fog, deep water, and the pitch black of night. He could not comprehend the invisible tactical superiority systematically exterminating his men. Finally, on May 24, 1943, confronting the outright annihilation of his forces, a shattered Dönitz issued the bitter order to withdraw all remaining U-boats from the North Atlantic. The reign of the wolfpacks was definitively over. As he drafted the retreat orders, he accepted his tactical defeat with grim resignation, firmly believing that overwhelming Allied industrial might and advanced radar alone had beaten him. It would take 31 years for the Grand Admiral to finally understand the complete, devastating truth behind his destruction. Sitting in his quiet study in Almula in 1974, the aging Grand Admiral closed the pages of The Ultra Secret. For 3 decades, Dönitz had meticulously constructed and defended his own historical narrative, insisting his submarines were defeated solely by the sheer brute force of Allied industrial production and sudden leaps in radar technology. Now, he had to process a profoundly uncomfortable reality. His centralized command structure had been fatally compromised from within by his own institutional arrogance. The massive volume of radio traffic required to micromanage his wolfpacks, the very foundation of his tactical doctrine, had directly provided Bletchley Park the raw data they needed to dismantle his fleet. The unyielding mathematical facts of the British codebreakers shattered a lifetime of comfortable rationalizations. Yet, the revelation that shocked Dönitz also corrects a persistent modern myth. The Battle of the Atlantic was never won by a single cryptographic magic bullet. Breaking the Enigma did not magically sink German submarines. As the agonizing 10-month intelligence blackout of 1942 proved, code-breaking without physical firepower was strategically useless, just as raw industrial production without intelligence meant sailing blindly into an ambush. The true Allied victory was forged in a modern, synchronized military ecosystem. It was a brutal, protracted struggle where the brilliant mathematical deductions of civilian cryptanalysts served to precisely direct the crushing weight of mass-produced escort carriers and centimetric radar. It was a campaign defined not by an effortless, invisible triumph of espionage, but by terrifying periods of tactical blindness, logistical endurance, and immense human sacrifice. Reconciling this documented reality with the fractured historical memory of the Atlantic brings us to the ultimate lesson of the U-boat war and the final fate of the man who commanded it. The Grand Admiral went to his grave knowing that his ultimate weapon had been compromised from the inside, his wolfpacks systematically dismantled by an intelligence breach his command stubbornly refused to see. His belated discovery stands as a chilling testament to the realities of modern conflict. The most impenetrable armor is often breached not by steel or explosives, but by mathematics.